the questions
Okay.
in the chat, please. All right. Hi, everyone. Good morning. I'm Joy. I work for DXC Technology as an architect. So I've got over 12 years of IT experience. I've been in consulting space for 7 years now and working on different verticals or different industries. And the latest industry that I'm working on is the airport, where we are using MuleSoft and Solas as an event broker. So I've been active in the MuleSoft community for I think 4 years now, and I've been invited for some of the MuleSoft conferences. And I'm currently a member of the Salesforce MuleSoft Partner Advisory Board. So this is the group where we help the Salesforce to by providing feedback on their products. So yeah, that's me. I didn't really have like a final slides because I just wanted to like jump around to different topics. Um, Please feel free to ask any questions. Um, if there's a challenge in asking in English, please don't be shy. Alan will help to translate that. So please, if there's anything that are not clear with you, ask away. So I would talk about the MuleSoft de- deployment strategies. So I've got here slides that's from the MuleSoft. So I will just touch on the important things around the deployment strategy. So first of all is I would talk about the structure of this deployment um, setup in the MuleSoft. So for for this, we would touch on the different deployment models, and then yeah, to start with, um, we have these MuleSoft control plane and runtime plane. So for the control plane, this is where the anypoint management, or where we have the design center, the exchange, where we have these, control management. And then the runtime plane is where the apps or the APIs are running. Um, yeah, that's a runtime plane. So we've got here the MuleSoft hosted runtime plane, which uses the cloud-based infrastructure. They called it IPaaS, so Integration Platform as a Service. So this MuleSoft hosted infrastructure is provisioned and managed by MuleSoft. So they call their IPaaS Cloud Hub. And then we've got the customer hosted runtime plane, which is entirely managed and provisioned by the customer, from the infrastructure, from the what do you call this, the Docker containers or the VMs, or providing their own cloud providers. These are the customer hosted. So for the customer hosted, so at the moment for MuleSoft hosted, we've got Cloud Hub and Cloud Hub 2. And then for the customer hosted, we've got the on-prem infrastructure, the bare metal or virtual machines. And then we've got the Docker containers. So we call those runtime fabric. And then we've got the private cloud edition as well. So I'm not going to go further in the private cloud edition, but I'll just try to compare this runtime fabric and the MuleSoft hosted or MuleSoft um, fully managed MuleSoft hosted runtime. So, okay. So comparing endpoint platform control plane options. So we've got two, as I've mentioned. So one is managed by MuleSoft, and this one is Anypoint Platform Private Cloud Edition. So Anypoint Private Cloud Edition is different from Runtime Fabric. So this is managed by customer, and then hosted endpoint platform is MuleSoft managed, and then the features of it is like what I've said, it's fully hosted by MuleSoft, and then you could deploy apps to Cloud Hub workers, and then yeah, and then the SLAs would be MuleSoft automatically patches and updates. Okay, so those are the comparisons. Okay, so each deployment model has its own runtime because we have to deploy the APIs to the runtime. They could sit into different location. So if it's a runtime fabric, bare metal or virtual machine, it's gonna be seated. It's gonna, and if it's not gonna be a runtime fabric self-managed Kubernetes. So two things, virtual machine and then self-managed Kubernetes. So for the virtual machine, it's gonna be hosted on-prem, your runtime. And then if it's self-managed Kubernetes, it could be on cloud, like Google Cloud Platform, Azure, AWS, OpenShift. So those are the two options for the runtime fabric. So what else here? Um, yeah, so you could see here the customer hosted runtime plane. It has all the everything in the Mule runtime. So your shared resources, your Mule app, everything. It's in the Mule runtime. So another comparison here, for the MuleSoft hosted, each Mule runtime is automatically installed in a separate Cloud Hub worker and can host one Mule application in a dedicated Cloud Hub worker. So I probably touch on the definition of what deployment is. So let's step back for those who don't know what deployment is before we deep dive in these different deployment options. So I'll just open another deploying apps. So let's step back and talk about what the deployment definition is. So deployment is activities that make a software system available for use. Typically concerns well-defined assets, applications, virtual machine, security policy, etc. Usually involve several tools or utilities to support the process. Anypoint platform supports value-use deployment models, which I've mentioned, to on-prem, runtime, cloud, and hybrid. So when deploying to a Mule runtime, a valid license is needed. So a person of software constructs, deploys a predefined asset to a deployment target. It's typically a black box. So the deployment process conceptual view is something like this. So we've got a person that schedules something, and then this is your artifact, this is what you're going to deploy, and then your target environment. So we deploy to make that software available to the consumers. So you deploy something to somewhere. So in the context of the Anypoint platform deployment model, we are deploying the apps to different target environments or target environments. It depends which deployment model you chose. So each organization has their own deployment options. Typically, we we try to get the API to the runtime plane, but we need to somehow communicate to the control plane, which is your runtime manager, for you to be able to deploy your applications to the runtime plane. So yeah, so there are a number of considerations about which you have to decide before executing the deployment. So I'll talk about a bit later what would be the considerations if you're working on a pre-sales or delivery. What would you propose to the customer based on what they need or what they require? Depends which deployment model, because there are, different factors to consider. So deployment considerations at a high level. Who will deploy? Is it a software or a tool? How are they going to deploy it? Is it manual or automated? In terms of security, are there access policies, requirements? And where will you deploy it? Is it on your own infrastructure? Is it in the data center? Is it in the third-party infrastructure, or is it both? And what are you deploying on? Is it a bare metal, virtual machines, containers, or EC2 instance? Yeah. So I'm not gonna touch on this because this is more on about how you're gonna deploy an application, which could be in different ways, like in Studio, Mule Maven, through the CI/CD pipeline, and other ways. All right. So now this is what I was talking about earlier around the deploy an application to different using different deployment model. So first of all, we've got the standalone Mule runtime. So the standalone Mule runtime is you have, for example, on your own laptop, own machine, you could install a Mule runtime on your own machine, or it could be somewhere that is provisioned by your hosting team, like companies, containers, or virtual machines. And then we've got, so the standalone Mule runtime, of course, it is fully managed and maintained by the customers. So for the Cloud Hub, of course, that's going to be on cloud. That's the Anypoint Platform iPaaS. And then it will be managed by the MuleSoft. So from the control plane to the runtime plane, it will be MuleSoft that will manage it. And then, so ignore this Anypoint Runtime Manager, but the Runtime Manager, this is managed by MuleSoft too. Okay, so deployment models. So this is highly simplified. So say for example, this is your Mule app. So manual deployment to an on-premise Mule runtime. So we deploy our Mule app or API to the customer hosted on-premise. So if you see here, from the operating system to the Mule runtime to the Mule API, it's all gonna be hosted on-prem. So for the deployment on-premise Mule runtime using using Runtime Manager. So before it gets here, the Anypoint control plane, which I mentioned earlier, this is where your Runtime Manager. If you see, if you've already explored the Anypoint platform, so there's a Runtime Manager. It's in the control plane. So that is where you assign the resources, you vertically and horizontally scale it. And then third is deployment to Cloud Hub using the Runtime Manager. So we've got two types of runtime planes here. The runtime plane that's seated on cloud and the runtime plane that's seated in on-premise. And then you've got the control plane, which is on cloud. So this is the high level illustration of the difference between this customer hosted and MuleSoft hosted runtime.
Hello, Joy. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt. And we can only see your self-introduction slide. Are
Oh,
you?
really?
Yeah, yeah. I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry. I've been talking. Hang on. I actually just share the entire screen. All right. Can you see it now?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Now, yeah. Okay.
All good?
Okay.
Oh my gosh. Sorry. Okay. I guess I'll just touch on to this one. So yeah, so the deployment is to definition basically is to make your software available for use. So the deployment consideration would be like this. So if this is automated or if it's manual, the security policies, and then deploying on bare metal virtual machines or containers. So yeah, so this is where I left off, where I have here the customer hosted on-prem, the MuleSoft hosted Cloud Hub. So I'll just quickly share something. Hang on, so I could easily explain. Just give me one moment. Okay, so let's just share. Okay, let me know if you can see the spreadsheet, Alan.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah. Thank you.
so this is good. This is the Cloud Hub, which is the Anypoint Platforms in IPaaS, Integration Platform as a Service. So this is your consumer, the one that's calling the API. Then you've got the load balancer. So say this is Cloud Hub. And then you've got the Anypoint platform here. So your Mule runtime sits in the worker or workers, which everything runs on cloud. So you've got the runtime manager and then the API manager that applies the policies, API policies. So, okay. So this one is more on shared load balancer type of, and this one is more on like you have a dedicated load balancer. So both are Cloud Hub, but this one has its own private cloud on cloud. And the only difference are you've got a virtual private cloud and you've got a dedicated load balancer where you could define your custom domain. So this one you cannot define your custom domain. So it would be, named as say region, like in the Anypoint platform trial account. That's where you're using the shared load balancer. And this one is the virtual private cloud. Okay. So another deployment type is you install it on your local environment. So your control plane is here where your API manager and runtime manager are. And then you've got the consumer here. And then this is your local environment. So you installed on your data center, own data center. And this is where your Mule runtime. So you have to link this to the control plane. So this is the MuleSoft hosted deployment. Sorry, customer hosted. And this is the runtime fabric where it uses the concept of nodes. So the runtime fabric could be self-managed. Say you've got AWS, Azure, or Google Cloud Platform, or OpenShift, Kubernetes. So you would set it up there, your own in say Azure. So you have the containers there in Azure, and then you deploy the Mule APIs. But your control plane would still be in cloud, but MuleSoft hosted. So that's the concept of the runtime fabric. So the difference between this and this is this one is it's running on-prem. It's running on your data center. All right. So yeah, and then you could have your own Docker container as well on your own data center. It's not tied up with, with AWS, with Azure. You don't have a cloud provider, but just your own Docker container. Okay, so I think that's all for the deployment model illustrations. Is there any questions before I proceed to the next one? Okay. Okay, no questions so far. All right, so, okay, this one, okay, just to add on that, I'll share my screen again. Okay, so this is how the Kubernetes and Docker looks like. So you've got your different nodes, and then inside there are different pods. And then it's the same for, I'm not sure if this is still available, this PCF. I don't think so. And this is the Anypoint Runtime Fabric, which they've added more support there. So they have the OpenShift now. Before, it used to be only three, like AWS, Azure, and Google Cloud Platform. But right now they have VMware Tanzu, and they've got what do you call this, OpenShift support. All right. Okay. So comparing Anypoint platform runtime plane options, when when the customer asks you, you have to know the difference among these three, which especially if you're working on pre-sales, or if you're working on an RFP, or if if the customer wanted to move away from an on-prem implementation. So if they could be looking at using a runtime fabric, self-managed Kubernetes, like what I've showed here, or they could go fully managed by MuleSoft, which is the Cloud Hub. So the difference is, are managed, of course, by MuleSoft is the Cloud Hub. Runtime Fabric and Customer Hosted would be managed by the customer. Um, what else? So another thing is the VMQs. So VMQ messages are load balanced, since you have a load balancer for Cloud Hub for deployments to multiple SCH workers or Cloud Hub workers. So another thing with Cloud Hub is you could scale horizontally and vertically. And then for the runtime fabric, VMQ messages are load balanced for deployments to a cluster of Mule runtime. So runtime fabric has a concept of clustering, where, say, for example, it shares a memory between two nodes. And then for the Cloud Hub, it has different way of sharing the state. So it could be an object store, if you've used object store before. And then for the customer hosted, VMQ messages are load balanced for deployments to a cluster of Mule runtimes. And then another important thing to note is the SLAs. So since MuleSoft fully manage the Cloud Hub, you could rescale, like what I've said, you could rescale Mule runtimes with zero downtime. So if you're working on an RFP or any pre-sales that has a zero downtime requirement, Cloud Hub would probably be the best. There would be a solution as well for runtime fabric, but it's gonna take an extra work to do, and it would be more on setting up. So you'll pay more on the resources and licensing as opposed to Cloud Hub that you just pay for the license. And then for customer hosted, of course, none, because there's no like disaster recovery or failover strategy for customer hosted. So additionally, for object store types, the MuleSoft hosted Cloud Hub connected endpoint object store services with the object store connector. And then for the customer hosted, it would be via REST API. So if you're familiar with the object store, and then in-memory file backed and Hazelcast backed OS. Another thing is the Anypoint MQ. So this is a MuleSoft product as well. So connect to Anypoint MQ service with the Anypoint MQ connector for the MuleSoft hosted. So again, out of the box connector. And then for the customer hosted, connect to Anypoint MQ service with the Anypoint MQ connector. But it's public internet access required. And then for the safely hidden properties, so yeah, for the MuleSoft hosted, it could be handled by the runtime manager, but for customer hosted, you cannot. So that's where you mask your passwords and client secrets. And then access security and restrictions. For the MuleSoft hosted, Mule apps can always access all Cloud Hub services. And then security is automatically managed within MuleSoft managed infrastructure or networks. And then for the customer hosted, Mule apps must have public internet access to these online services. So that's another good thing because the security patching would be managed by the MuleSoft. All right. So deployment model, cloud-based. So we've got the design center, exchange management center, and then you've got your Mule runtime. For the standalone runtime, Mule runtime, you've got these three only without the Mule runtime, because your Mule runtime would be here in the on-premise as opposed to the Mule runtime, which is fully on cloud. And then for the Anypoint runtime fabric, it's the same, but different infrastructure components because you're using Kubernetes or Docker. And then for the private cloud edition, it's going to be fully on-prem, everything including the management plane. So all of these up here are MuleSoft managed. The control plane for Mule runtime and runtime fabric would be managed by MuleSoft. And here, the customer would manage the on-premise, and the appliance would be MuleSoft, and the infrastructure would be customer. And then this one is fully managed by customer. Nothing will be managed by MuleSoft. So just so you know that the runtime fabric using bare metal or virtual machine, I think it's gonna reach the end of life support. I'm not sure if this year or next year. So I won't go down that path of proposing the use of the virtual machine or bare metal. So you could either, if you wanted to have a runtime fabric, you could go self-managed Kubernetes, which is, you have your AWS, Azure, where your APIs are going to run. All right. So any questions so far?
Hello, Joy. There's
Yes.
some questions on the chat.
Okay. What's the question, Alan?
So I can see.
Uh,
Um,
is it from Edward Abdino?
yeah.
Are you aware about any installation of MuleSoft with the control plane running on premises, even in the cloud, but hosted by the client himself? So, are you talking about the private cloud edition where the control plane? So, can they be audible, Alan?
Okay.
So that question is from Edward, if
Yes.
I.
Yes.
So I'll share my screen again. So are you talking about this one, Edward? Like this um control plane would be on the customer side. By the way, you could unmute and elaborate your question, please.
Hello. Yes,
Hello.
I tried to put my question on the chart with more precision than going through the mic. But yes, basically, long story short, that's it. I'm extremely curious to know about any existing concrete customer using either private cloud edition or Foundry or any other solution when he manage. Control plane and he can estimate the time of restoring from backup of control plane.
Yeah, there are customers using the private cloud edition. Yes. So does that answer your question?
Well, basically, okay. The question was, are you aware of concrete customer? Well, okay, if it's NDA or it's completely secret, or maybe there is some silo in Arizona just managing warheads in the nuclear forces. Maybe it's not possible to say something about this. But
Yeah.
to be honest, what I'm interested in is to figure out whether is popular. Is it well? What kind of customer are just using this? And
Mm,
this is in the because of trying to figure out how to build a solution that is more or less independent from external actions and
mm.
whether it is actually suitable. Maybe it is not suitable for a variety of reasons. So even banking company do not want to apply this.
Yeah, so as far as I'm aware, only the customers that are based in America. I'm not sure exactly who are those customers that uses the private cloud edition. But so far, I haven't had any experience around implementing a private cloud edition, in particular in ANZ region. Um, so maybe because of the regulatories, policies around having the control plane fully managed by them, fully controlled by them, because the control plane for cloud-based at the moment only supports two location. One is in America, the US East, and one is in Europe. So even though your runtime plane is in Sydney region or in Tokyo region, your plane would be in US East. So if there's a strict company policy that they don't want that, control plane to be hosted somewhere else, then that would be, a different discussion with the MuleSoft team. So to know about those customers, of course, MuleSoft would know that, but I don't know who are those customers that uses private cloud edition in America.
Okay, very good, very interesting. So that make me even more curious about this option, and thank you very much for sharing this very particular, interesting, and useful and valuable insight.
Yeah, no, that's all right. So I'll just tell my experience around these common argument about the control plane and runtime plane. So when we're working on the pre-sales, they always have this red flag about control plane sitting on US. But if you would read more about the MuleSoft documentation, we're not really storing any data there in the US control plane. So the API sits in the runtime plane, and if there are um, persistence of the data, it would stay on the runtime plane. So if the client say is in Australia, your runtime plane is in the Sydney region. It could be in Sydney region if that's the closest. So that's where, so meaning you pass that requirement of having your data hosted or stays in the Australia. Yeah. So what we normally do is we provide security and compliances certificate about the control plane, sitting on, US East. And additionally, we could provide IRAP assessment. So if you are MuleSoft customer and has an enterprise license, you could talk to your account manager and ask for those details. So they'll give you normally a login to the Salesforce portal, so you could download those certificates and provide it to the customer. All good. So there's a,
That's really clear. Unfortunately or fortunately, the reasons of thinking about it is not actually limited to the question of data stored on the US soil. It's very large topic, and I just wanted to avoid spending pretty young years of everyone attending this conference. But it's very interesting to know, to figure out or to find only one who is actually doing this before continue other investigation for me. Thank you.
mm, all good. So let's continue. So the last topic I wanted to discuss to you was around the um, endpoint platform deployment scenarios evaluation. So when you're working on an RFP, for example, you have to be able to articulate this to the customer on what would be the best solution for them and how you came up with that solution. So these are the factors, or these are the variables that you have to list the pros and cons for each deployment model. So number one is regulatory. Like what I've said earlier, for Europe, they have the GDPR. So it should stay in Europe. Um, and yeah, it's including metadata about API invocations and messages. So second thing is time to market. So the regulatory, if you're using a cloud hub, you're dependent on the AWS region. So if you are in Japan, you could have Tokyo as your closest region for AWS. If I'm based in Australia, sorry, in New Zealand, the closest AWS region would be in Sydney. And then time to market. So it's no brainer that it's easier to implement and deploy applications in Cloud Hub settings. So given that, it's already an iPaaS. It's already built, and you just need to like do some configurations on top of it. Then that would be a quicker way to do your implementation, as opposed to having a runtime fabric where you have to take care of the infrastructure, you have to log into your Azure and set up the containers there, and then before you could even deploy your APIs. And then IT operations effort, accessing on-premises data sources. So I think this is more on about the latency, like how close your data sources. So if your data center is in Tokyo, then probably it won't make much difference if you are having your API on the Tokyo AWS region. But of course, the closer, the faster. So yeah, and then flexibility of deployment across cloud providers, isolation between Mule apps. So it's important to strategize your high availability requirement, like how easy to achieve that in different deployment model. And then so going back to the flexibility of deployment across cloud providers, in Cloud Hub, you could just, if you have that license to have a global deployment model, so not all the tiers in Cloud Hub. So we've got gold, platinum, and titanium license in Cloud Hub. I believe the platinum and titanium are the ones that you could switch to different, region. And then what else? So control over mill runtime tuning. About the scalability as well, which around the horizontal and vertical. So if you have, say, requirements that at end of the month, that's the peak of the transaction. So you should be able to support that scalability. In Cloud Hub 1, it's just a manual scale. There's a special enterprise license that they could do an automated scale, but most of the time it's manual scale of the workers. So for the runtime fabric, it's more, there's a pro there in runtime fabric because you could easily scale via containers. But with the upcoming Cloud Hub 2, there would be, I'm not sure when it's going to be released, I think sometime this year, they would have an automatic horizontal scaling only for Cloud Hub 2. So in Cloud Hub 2, it's different because they're using the concept of the nodes, just like as the runtime fabric, using different cloud provider. So with that, you could easily scale as opposed to using, EC2, AWS EC2 instance. And then you have to think about as well how easy to roll out new releases, how could easily integrate with your CI/CD pipeline if you have. And then redeployment with zero downtime, blue-green deployment, and then the HA, high availability, and then automated failover. It's also best to consider how each deployment model would support the out-of-the-box features like object store, dashboards, insights, alerts, auto scaling. And then endpoint edge security, it's only available for the runtime fabric and the tokenization as well. So I believe tokenization is not available for Cloud Hub. All right, so for regulatory or IT operation requirements, so that's the processing of every data item. Requires Anypoint Private Cloud Edition or Anypoint platform for Pivotal. I'm not sure if PCF is still available. And then time to market. yeah, it favors more a MuleSoft hosted anypoint platform, which is Cloud Hub. And then IT operations effort, it favors MuleSoft hosted anypoint platform overall, favors anypoint runtime fabric over anypoint PCE. And then latency and throughput when accessing on-premises data center favors scenarios where Mule runtimes can be deployed close to these data sources, like what I've said, closer, meaning anypoint runtime fabric, PCE, over Cloud Hub with geographically close runtime plane. And then flexibility of deployment across cloud providers favors anypoint runtime fabric over PCE. It does not apply to MuleSoft hosted anypoint platform deployment as it uses AWS. Yeah, it's locked in AWS. And then isolation between Mule applications, it favors bare metal over VMs over containers for Mule runtimes. Then control over Mule runtime tuning, characteristics like JVM, machine memory, garbage collection, favors hybrid anypoint runtime fabric and anypoint PCE over MuleSoft hosted anypoint platform, because you have more access with those information. And then scalability of runtime plane, consider horizontal and vertical scaling, consider static and dynamic scaling, favors cloud deployments of runtime plane, including Cloud Hub. It favors the iPaaS functionality over manually provisioned Mule runtimes. And then roll out of new releases continuously weekly in the MuleSoft hosted control plane versus quarterly releases of anypoint PCE. And then redeployment with zero downtime is the feature available in MuleSoft anypoint platform and anypoint runtime fabric only. So not with the customer hosted, because you're going to do it yourself. You're going to do the patch, you're going to do the upgrade. And then HA favors cloud deployment models of runtime plane, including Cloud Hub, favors iPaaS functionality over manually provisioned Mule runtimes. And then automated failover favors cloud deployments of runtime plane, including Cloud Hub, favors iPaaS functionality over manually provisioned Mule runtimes. Then out of the box features, it favors cloud deployments of runtime plane, including Cloud Hub. So iPaaS or Cloud Hub would be the best solution for these out of the box features. And anypoint security only in customer hosted infrastructure. So like what I said, it's not supported in Cloud Hub. So you need to have your own like a WAF in front of your load balancer. And then tokenization feature is available only in customer hosted. Okay, so I'm right. It's not available in Cloud Hub. All right. I think that's all I have